Picture this. A thunderous roar echoes across a blood-soaked battlefield. The ground trembles beneath the weight of armored giants charging at full gallop, their steel-tipped lances gleaming like death itself in the morning sun. These aren't just soldiers. They're the apex predators of medieval warfare, the most feared and revered warriors Europe has ever known. But here's the shocking truth that history books rarely tell you. Behind their shining armor and noble codes lay secrets so dark, so brutal, that they would make even modern special forces soldiers think twice. Today, we're peeling back 8 centuries of romantic legend to reveal the raw, unfiltered reality of the deadliest warriors in human history, the medieval knights. What you're about to discover will forever change how you see these so-called champions of chivalry. Let me take you back to the year 476 AD. The mighty Roman Empire has just crumbled, leaving Western Europe in complete chaos. Barbarian tribes are tearing apart what's left of civilization. Trade routes have collapsed, and ordinary people are living in constant terror. It's in this apocalyptic wasteland that something extraordinary begins to emerge, something that will define European warfare for the next 1,000 years. As the dust settles from Rome's fall, a new system starts taking shape. Desperate rulers begin trading land for protection, creating what we now call feudalism. But here's where it gets fascinating. These early medieval lords discovered that mounted warriors, heavy cavalry, are absolutely devastating on the battlefield. A single man on horseback, properly equipped and trained, can cut through dozens of foot soldiers like a scythe through wheat. By the time of Charlemagne in the 8th century, this realization has sparked a military revolution. The most powerful innovation? The stirrup, a simple loop of metal that might seem insignificant, but it literally changed the course of history. With stirrups, a mounted warrior could brace himself and deliver crushing blows with lance and sword without falling off his horse. This tiny piece of technology gave birth to the most dominant military force the medieval world would ever see. But here's where the story takes a dark turn that most people never hear about. These early knights weren't noble heroes. They were essentially medieval warlords, little different from the barbarians they fought. They pillaged, murdered, and terrorized the very people they were supposed to protect. The church realized they had created monsters, and something had to be done. Enter the code of chivalry, but not for the romantic reasons you might think. This wasn't about courtly love and rescuing damsels. This was damage control on an epic scale. The church desperately needed to channel these killing machines toward something productive, so they invented an entire mythology around knighthood. Honor, courage, loyalty, protection of the weak. These weren't natural knight virtues. They were carefully constructed propaganda designed to keep these warriors from destroying Christian civilization from within. The genius of this system was making knights believe they were God's warriors. Suddenly, their violence had divine purpose. The brutal reality? Most knights ignored the code whenever it was inconvenient. But the myth was so powerful that it survived for centuries. Let's talk about what made these warriors so terrifyingly effective. First, their armor. And this is where medieval engineering reaches almost science fiction levels of sophistication. Early knights wore chainmail, thousands of interlocked steel rings that could stop a sword slash but left you vulnerable to crushing blows and arrows. But by the 15th century, armorers had perfected something that still amazes engineers today: full plate armor. This wasn't the clunky metal suit Hollywood shows you. This was precision-engineered protection that weighed only about 60 pounds, less than what modern soldiers carry, but could stop almost any weapon of the time. The joints were so perfectly articulated that a knight in full plate could run, climb, even do somersaults. Here's the mind-blowing part. Tests of authentic medieval plate armor show it could stop bullets from early firearms. These suits were literally bulletproof, which explains why knights remained dominant for so long even after gunpowder arrived. Their weapons were equally sophisticated. The knight's sword wasn't just a metal bar. It was a precisely balanced killing instrument, evolved over centuries of trial and error on real battlefields. The longsword, in particular, was so perfectly designed that modern fencing masters still study medieval techniques. But the lance, that was their ultimate weapon. A 14-foot spear couched under the arm, backed by a 1,000-pound warhorse at full gallop. The physics are terrifying. That's roughly 3 tons of force concentrated into a needle-sharp point. Contemporary accounts describe lances punching through multiple armored men like a hot knife through butter. The true test of knight effectiveness came during the Crusades, and here's where the story gets really fascinating. The Church had essentially weaponized religious fervor, creating military orders like the Knights Templar and Hospitaller, warrior monks who combined the fighting skills of knights with the fanatical dedication of religious zealots. These weren't weekend warriors playing at war. The Templars, for instance, maintained a military discipline that would impress modern special forces. They had sophisticated logistics, advanced siege warfare techniques, and most importantly, they fought with the absolute conviction that death in battle guaranteed them a place in paradise. The effectiveness was staggering. A relatively small force of Crusader knights repeatedly defeated much larger Muslim armies, not through superior numbers, but through superior training, equipment, and that terrifying psychological advantage of men who literally believed God was on their side. But here's the secret that history often overlooks. These military orders became incredibly wealthy and powerful, essentially medieval multinational corporations with armies. The Templars developed banking systems that spanned Europe, accumulated vast treasures, and built fortress networks that controlled entire regions. They weren't just warriors. They were medieval military-industrial complexes. October 25th, 1415. The Battle of Agincourt. This date marks the beginning of the end for knight supremacy, and the story of what happened there reads like a military disaster movie. Picture the scene. The cream of French nobility, thousands of knights in gleaming armor, facing off against a ragged English army led by King Henry V. The French outnumbered the English 3-1. By every rule of medieval warfare, this should have been a massacre of the English. But Henry had something the French didn't expect: the English longbow, and more importantly, thousands of commoners who had trained with it since childhood. What happened next shocked the medieval world to its core. The French knights charged, just as they had done successfully for centuries. But this time, the sky darkened with arrows. Not just a few dozen, but thousands upon thousands. These weren't ordinary arrows either. The English bodkins could punch through chainmail like paper, and even plate armor had weak points. Within minutes, the flower of French chivalry was wallowing in the mud, their expensive armor now a death trap that left them helpless as English soldiers moved among them with daggers, finishing off the wounded. In a single afternoon, the myth of knightly invincibility died forever. But here's the truly shocking part that most histories don't mention. Henry ordered the execution of French prisoners. Hundreds of captured knights slaughtered in cold blood, despite the supposed rules of chivalrous warfare. The age of honor was ending, replaced by an age of pragmatic brutality. The death blow to knight supremacy came not from English arrows, but from something far more revolutionary: gunpowder. Early firearms might have been crude and unreliable, but they had one decisive advantage. They could punch through the finest armor ever made, and they could be used by any peasant with a few weeks of training. Suddenly, a lifetime of expensive training, a fortune spent on armor and weapons, and centuries of military tradition could be negated by a farmer's son with a musket. The psychological impact was devastating. The very foundations of medieval society, that some men were born to fight and rule while others were born to serve, crumbled in the face of gunpowder equality. Castle walls that had stood for centuries became useless overnight when cannons arrived. The feudal system, built around the military service of knights in exchange for land, became obsolete when kings could hire professional armies equipped with firearms. But here's the remarkable thing about knights. Even though their military dominance ended over 500 years ago, their cultural impact remains stronger than ever. The ideals they claim to represent, honor, courage, loyalty, protection of the innocent, these concepts still resonate with us today. Modern military organizations around the world still use chivalric language and ceremonies. The Medal of Honor, the Victoria Cross, knighthoods granted by the British Crown, all of these trace their lineage back to medieval concepts of martial honor. Even in popular culture, from superhero movies to fantasy novels, we keep returning to the archetype of the warrior protector, the person who uses strength in service of justice. Batman is essentially a modern knight. So is Superman. The appeal is universal and timeless. The knights may have been the deadliest warriors of their age, but perhaps their greatest victory was cultural rather than military. They created a myth so powerful, so enduring, that centuries after the last knight hung up his armor, we're still trying to live up to their idealized example. The next time you see someone helping a stranger, standing up for what's right, or putting their life on the line for others, you're witnessing the true legacy of the medieval knight. Not the armor or the weapons, but the idea that with great power comes great responsibility, and that the strong have a duty to protect the weak. So what do you think? Were knights really the noble heroes of legend? Or were they simply medieval special forces wrapped in religious propaganda? The evidence suggests they were both, and that contradiction might be exactly what makes them so fascinating to us today. If this journey through the secret world of medieval knights has captivated you as much as it has me, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We have so many more incredible historical mysteries waiting to be uncovered. What would you like to explore next? The secret weapons of the Vikings? The true story behind the fall of Rome? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, keep questioning what you think you know about history, because the truth is always more amazing than the legend.